BRICS member states are major players in the world's energy landscape, with a significant impact on global energy consumption and supply. While BRICS countries are actively promoting a clean energy transition, with many implementing policies and incentives to encourage renewable energy development, there are some challenges, though, in facing their energy transition, including limited financial resources, technological barriers, inadequate grid infrastructure, and policy implementation gaps. So, how should countries, especially BRICS countries in Africa, be answering some of these burning energy questions? Well, to get some answers, I spoke to the executive chairman of the African Energy Chamber, NJ Ayuk. NJ Ayuk, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the BRICS Africa channel.
Thank you so much for having me, Peter. It's an honor.
So, NJ, what drives your passion for ensuring Africa maximizes its energy resources responsibly?
Peter, for far too long, our continent has been a laughing stock when people talk about energy, talking about development, talking about industrialization. I think if we are going to get an Africa that is well developed, an Africa that is that Africa of the future, then energy has to be part of that discussion, and we need to start having real deliverables. My passion comes from me thinking about 600 million without access to electricity, 900 million without access to clean cooking technologies, most of them women. We need to be drivers of hope and solutions for them. And our generation cannot carry the same old narrative that it cannot be done in Africa and continue that. So that drives me every day to ensure that Africans have that energy that we need, because when we have energy, then it translates to jobs, it translates to opportunities, and we can build it right here in this continent.
Africa faces some unique challenges in this energy transition. There's developmental needs on the one hand, and then, of course, this issue of environmental concerns. How do you see African nations navigating this balance whilst pursuing this just transition?
We cannot look at it as either or. Energy poverty and climate change are two sides of the same coin. Yet we have to also understand that we have to develop and industrialize Africa. So there are some African countries that are already net zero. But then it's all about finding ways to drive up energy in a low carbon environment and also still be able to meet the needs of everyday people and not just their elites. Our transition from Africa in Africa has to go in stages, not at the same timelines with those that are already wealthy and that have already profited from fossil fuels and everything. We have to go first. We have to deal first with access. Those they have nots, they need to have energy access. Then you have to then focus on how do you move into bringing renewables into our energy systems. So we cannot just adopt a Western narrative on a transition and then make it plant it into Africa. We need to look at our African realities, and renewables are going to have a big role to play in Africa. The sun might not shine forever, the wind might not blow forever, but you might need natural gas most of the time to give you that base load that you need in order to be able to still drive up and industrialize Africa. But don't count out renewables, don't bet against renewables, bring it right in because we need it.
So the international community is often calling for Africa to embrace cleaner energies. And I wonder, how does Africa perhaps push back when it comes to unrealistic demands towards this climate change goal?
Well, financing. The pushback that we have to do sometimes is that you're asking us to do something that you can't even pay for. There have been billions of dollars that have been promised to Africans. So, and during COP, we've not seen it. We've not seen a dime. Promises made, promises have not been kept, and that is a problem. But we have to also look at what is realistic. Some African countries have more renewables in their energy systems than most of the industrialized nations. Look at Kenya with what they've been able to do around the Turkana basins and a lot using geothermal to really power the country. Look at Senegal, it has about 30% of its energy systems are renewables, and more of that would happen. But we have to be able to create an enabling environment in Africa to drive that up. But the international community putting this pressure on Africa without giving it a sense or how to finance it, it is unfair. But the other thing right now we're looking at it is that most African countries, they are stuck trying to address the deficits in budgets. They are stuck trying to finance their loans that they have with these developed countries. So where are they going to have the money to invest in a costly solar or wind system that they cannot afford today? So you can't ask people to do something that they cannot afford. And that is where it's unjust. So the promises made after the Paris Accords that said financing would come. We will not get you stuck in a debt trap. We will get you the funding you need to go into cleaner, better energy. It has not been kept. And so promises made, promises failed, and too many broken promises. That is our biggest dilemma as we stand right now.
There are a number of African countries now part of the groups, the BRICS grouping rather, and there will be more joining the party as the years go by. What do you think the BRICS grouping can do to help African nations in particular with their energy questions?
I think you have three different strategies which you could see coming out of BRICS. I think it's a great organization. You're going to see, number one, sharing technologies, because sometimes we always think it's just about money. You need to be able to share those technologies that you're going to use to drive up. Look at what you see in Brazil, China, Russia, India. They've been able to address their energy security issues, and they've done really well. They could share that technology and know-how with African countries so that we can then be able to drive that up. Second part you're going to have to see with BRICS is going to be finding a way to work with the BRICS Bank to close the funding gap and really get some of our projects to become bankable, so that then you have a third phase where investment could come out of BRICS countries that could really be able to drive up African energy development. Don't forget, when it comes to renewables, China is currently the biggest driver of renewable energy, producing more than any other nation in the world, and is going to do so much with critical minerals and hydrogen and all of that. So this is time to get into those partnerships that would work around the BRICS, around all the BRICS nations, and still be able to do that. So it's going to be bankable. It's not an aid or charity program that we are asking for. And we need to embrace these new BRICS partnerships as BRICS has embraced us, and we need to go drive it and go fast. That fierce urgency of now has to exist on how we look at this.
My next question, I think you might have partly answered already, but I'm just wondering, we're sitting on huge piles of resources in terms of fossil fuels, and we need them for development. How do we approach this journey forwards in terms of transition, cleaner energy, renewables, etc., whilst at the same time we have this resource that can be a game changer for us in the short term?
Fossil fuels are going to be around for the next 100 years. The reports of its death are grossly exaggerated. So here's what we do. We produce every drop of hydrocarbons to fix our situations right now, fix government budgets, grow entrepreneurship, deal with industrialization, and deal with our base load energy that we need to be able to improve the lives of our people and create more jobs and more opportunities. At the same time that we're doing that, we set aside a chunk of the money coming from fossil fuels to invest and become drivers of renewables and take leadership in that. It is just that easy. But we cannot, at this time, be that continent that says we are going to abandon our fossil fuels because somebody is giving us lectures from international countries. The truth of the matter is that They have used fossil fuels to drive human flourishing. They have used fossil fuels to better their economies, drive industrialization, and grow their economies bigger than what we've ever seen. It's a little bit unfair and unjust that when it's time for Africa to do the same, they tell you time is up. You got to go away. Look at what you could do with natural gas today. Isn't it a shame that today Africa is begging for food from Ukraine, a country at war, when we have so much gas? How do Ukraine become such a big wheat producer? They use natural gas to power fertilizer plants, and they use their big, massive land to really grow wheat and agricultural basis. We could do just that in Africa. If you cut out fossil fuels today, we are going to have a continent where half of the people would die because we will not be able to feed ourselves because we'll have very no fertilizer. You have to understand that a byproduct of natural gas is you get fertilizer, urea, ammonia, NPK, and you need that to really deal with your food security needs. So it's not just about having gas to power. So when you look at fossil fuels, it's kind of like a Swiss knife. It is used for many things, and that is what we need to have more education of our people to understand that yes, fossil fuels have an impact on the climate, but then we have to focus the money that the Western nations have not been able to give us to deal with adaptation. They should use those funds to get to curb the carbon emissions out of the air, because if carbon emissions of greenhouse gas in the air is a problem, then let's take those greenhouse gas emissions off and we can work that with technology. But it's not about stopping Africa from using these fossil fuels to better the life of its people.
All right, then the question then comes up, do we then use these fossil fuels to focus on domestic consumption and energy independence, or do we prioritize export revenues, for example?
You could get export revenues by still dealing with domestic issues. We have one of the biggest trade agreements that we have not yet enacted and using very well. And we need to change that because there's some work we need to do at home. The Intra-Africa Free Trade Act, we have to start dealing with cross-border gas trading, oil trading, and that is where you will still be able to get those export revenues from there. But at the same time, we're taking care of people right here at home. There are 1.5 billion people in this continent. That's a huge market. We can be focused a lot all about just selling gas into Europe, which is 300 million. That is a smaller market and it's going to decrease as it comes. So you got to invest in the future. The future is going to be Africa. By 2050, we're going to be 2.5 billion plus. So what do? We close our energy infrastructure gap. We build pipelines and build railroads and build more gas to power so that we can take care of our people right here. When people would say, well, Africans can afford it. That's not true. When you had cell phones coming to Africa in massive numbers, most people said Africans would not be able to afford cell phones. But what happens? You got people with two, three iPhones, man. You got a guy with a Samsung and an iPhone, and they are still buying data. Some of the cell phone companies are become these Africans that we invested in that became the new billionaires, whether it is Strive in Zimbabwe or MTN in from South Africa, all over the continent. You've seen a lot of stuff happening with that. Who is paying for the data, for the phone bills? It's Africans. So that talk about Africans can afford it, it's not true. Our purchasing power is going to increase. We're going to get more jobs, but we need to really look inward and find ways to provide that electricity to Africans. And when we do that, then you would see Africans paying for it every day. And so that if Europe with CBAM or other things shut us out from bringing in energy or our oil into Europe, we should be able to use it right here in Africa by building LNG receiving terminals, building more refineries like what Dangote is doing in Nigeria or what Angola is doing in the Lobito corridor. And then you're able to use your oil to process it in Africa and sell it within Africa. So you're receiving more value from your product than just exporting it and waiting that somebody is going to give you aid somehow, or they're going to give you returns, which when money goes to politicians, they spend it sometimes not in not very good ways.
And that brings us perhaps to my final question. When you talked about how Sometimes our leaders spend our revenues. What's your message to our leaders across the continent as they grapple with these complex energy questions?
Times have changed. Africans have grown, and Africans want to see an Africa that is as beautiful as the people that live in it. It is so complex when we do politics. Sometimes I say you campaign in poetry, but you govern in prose. The reality today is that we need to embrace markets. We need to look at limited government. We need to encourage entrepreneurship, but government should not be the one that is picking winners and losers. We need to open up. We need to deal with issues around visas because when we cannot travel across border, then we cannot trade with one another. We need to look at how we incentivize those that are doing very well, like training young people, building capacity. We need to also look at how we deal with taxes. All of these things get to deal with how we move towards a just transition. You are not going to get renewables in Africa if we don't find ways to incentivize it and create an enabling environment and deal with honestly with our above ground risk issues. Sometimes some of the issues that we've held ourselves have held us behind when it comes to corruption and transparency. We got to address them. These are African issues. It's not somebody telling us that internationally, but also we got to also be able to sit firm and speak with one strong voice. That voice that says, do not let African resources be stopped or be kept in the ground. If we are going to deal, if African leadership has to wake up and recognize that if we're going to deal with looking at a whole clean energy platforms, we should build that supply chain in Africa so that we can process the minerals in Africa, the supply chain can be in Africa, and we can get Africans back to work again. Our young people are looking at you with so much unemployment. They should not have to pick up the chance to say, the only chance for me to succeed in this continent is to cross the Mediterranean to Europe or try to cross through with the Sahara or go to Dubai. They should be able to find good, well-paying jobs right here at home, become credible taxpayers, and be able to build multiplier jobs by them starting and growing that business. That Africa, that chance to make that happen is ours, and we can be drivers of that future. And I really hope that African leadership really hits the call and pay attention to these young people because they're speaking to us every day. We just have to listen to them and act upon it.
NJ Ayuk, Executive Chairman of the African Energy Chamber, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the BRICS Africa channel.
Thank you, Peter. It's always an honor. Thank you so very much.